Hi, this is Matt with State of Flex here to talk to you about Kevin Smith's sophomore effort, Mallrats. This one's kind of interesting because at the time of its release, this movie was absolutely panned by critics, and audiences didn't see it. This movie had a shorter release window than Clerks, made less money theatrically than Clerks, even though it was on 500 more screens than Clerks ever had in its entire theatrical run. Clerks made more money. Clerks was only ever on 50 screens across the entire nation, and it made $4 million. This movie made 2.8, I believe. Anyway, getting to the movie itself, it's interesting because even though its legacy should have lived and died with that opening weekend, this movie lives on in a kind of interesting way. And it's because, kind of like Clerks, Clerks was a snapshot of a very specific time, a very specific moment, capturing youth culture of a very specific youth trend in early 90s. This movie is a snapshot of a world yet to come. A world that looks, by everyday standards, like any day you go onto any internet forum for any film or any piece of media culture. This movie is sort of like a bud that blossomed over time because it captures the youth of the comic book nerd, which went from being obscure, like pop culture to its own trend. It's not even pop culture anymore, as Kevin Smith has many times said. It's just strictly culture. Everybody knows who Iron Man is. This movie expects you to come with that knowledge, and expected that of you in 1995. You have to look at 1995. The comic book movies that were out were the 3 Batman movies produced by Tim Burton, 2 of which were directed by Burton. You had the 4 Superman movies, the straight-to-video Captain America movie of 1990, and the straight-to-video Punisher movie. That's about it. There was nothing else. I think this is the same year that Barbed Wire came out, or maybe it had been the following year. This is 5 whole years before you got the X-Men, a movie that was so afraid of being a comic book movie, it stripped itself of any kind of theatricality. It stripped itself of anything that would make it look like a comic book movie because they didn't want to look like the other guys. They didn't want to look at the movies that we made fun of. By that point, in 2000, general public made fun of Superman and made fun of Batman because they were so over the top and hokey. It wasn't until 2002, 7 years after this movie, that Spider-Man came out and leaned in and embraced the comic book source material in such a positive way that you saw a transformation happen. This movie gave you the Stan Lee cameo a full 13 years before you would expect them twice a year, every year, for the rest of that man's life. Mallrats has a really interesting legacy because of this. This is a snapshot of the internet age before internet was really a thing. And that makes this movie compelling. However, as a movie on its own, this movie is not particularly great. I understand the criticisms that it had, because as directionless as Clerks seemed to be, it had something to say, even if it was something so basic as just because they serve you doesn't mean they like you, which was the tagline of that film. But that's ultimately what the movie's kind of trying to say. You go into Clerks watching it, never thinking about the clerk. At least I never did. And then you watch that movie where the subject is the clerk the entire time, and you're forced to really examine who these people are, and they're just like us. They think everything that we did about them back at us, and it's kind of an interesting statement that you're seeing. Mallrats doesn't really have anything it's trying to say. It's a movie where the opening begins with 2 kind of losers who get dumped, and then by the end of it, they don't. They're no longer dumped. They're back together, but they haven't really evolved much. Certainly the Brody character hasn't, and he's the one that kind of steals the show, and you're kind of meant to root for it. But it's just kind of a dopey premise, and there's nothing really that's accomplished narratively. It's just a restatement of Clerks set in a mall without any of the substance of Clerks, which is disappointing. However, this movie's legacy lives on because people found it. Clerks is kind of a hard film to watch. First of all, black and white tends to turn people off for whatever reason, and that's disappointing, but it's a fact of the film language. Mallrats doesn't have that. It has a sleek color, lots of color. It's a very bright and colorful film. Clerks is kind of a slow movie that asks you to listen to what these characters are saying, because they're saying sometimes profound things, oftentimes goofy, pointless shit in between. This movie earns the title of a movie. It moves. It's just got a great energy to it that keeps you going through. Even if you're disinterested, the film never feels boring, never feels like trotting. Or plotting, rather. You kind of pass through fairly evenly. It's got a dynamite cast. It had a dynamite young cast then, and it has an impressive cast now. Some of these stars really went on to do some pretty great things. And hearkening back into the bud that would eventually bloom and blossom, it's a movie about comic books that eventually got like 3 pretty big comic book actors in the movie. Besides Stan Lee, it got Jason Lee, who would go on to be Syndrome in The Incredibles, which is the best adaptation of the Fantastic Four we've yet to get. It gets Michael Rooker, who, as of the week that I'm recording this video, just opened up in the Suicide Squad and was Yondu in the Guardians of the Galaxy films. He's the heart and soul of that second film. And then it has Ben Affleck, who after this went on to do Daredevil, which gets, I think, unfairly maligned. He's great in that movie, even if the movie isn't as great as he is in it. And then I think he is the best screen Batman. I'm just going to say it right there. I'm not a fan of Zack Snyder. I'm not a fan of any of Zack Snyder's 3 interpretations of the Batman-Superman characters, but I think Ben Affleck gave the best screen presence. He looks the most Batman, he looks the most Bruce Wayne, he gave the best performances as both, he married them together, even though the script wasn't quite there. He gets like an A+. He's fantastic. This movie had a young Ben Affleck. And speaking to the other cast members, Michael Rooker and Shannon Doherty give really strong performances. They were the big stars back then. Jason Lee it steals the show. Like, the movie is T.S.'s movie. T.S. is the main character, and he spans the narrative. You're meant to follow and like him. He is so underwhelming, and Jason Lee's Brody is so dynamic. Even if he's not necessarily the most likable guy, he is, like, you can't take your eyes away from him or his performance. He's so dynamic that, like, for the poster of the film, he's the center of it, doing, like, the Luke Skywalker pose with Shannon Doherty at his leg. And then the other person that steals the show, Jason Mewes. Jay and Silent Bob were fun little characters, but they were a minor presence in Clerks. I liked them in it, but they were kind of minor. So minor that I didn't even discuss them hardly at all in my retrospective of Clerks. Mallrats changes that. Mallrats gives you Jay and Silent Bob, and you can't look away. You want to see more of them. They're not in enough of the movie, and it's all because, like, Silent Bob is fun and gives, like, great emotive eyes and stuff like that, and, like, the sad puppy dog thing whenever Mewes attacks him. But it's Jason Mewes that steals this movie. He is spectacular, and to think he was almost not cast in it. The studio didn't like him. They didn't want him. They wanted Seth Green or Breckin Meyer, both of which I think are fantastic actors, neither of which I think were right for the character of Jay. And I'm glad that they kept on with Mewes, and I'm glad that we have had several more excellent performances from Jason Mewes as the Jay character, especially by the time we get to his currently final performance as Jay in Jay and Silent Bob Reboot. That man can actually act. He acts really well in that film. And it's all because of this film sort of put the spotlight on him where it wasn't in Clerks. This film also kind of tapped into the whole game show thing, or reality TV thing that sort of stole the nation about 4 years after Mallrats hit theatrically. for that window of like 1998, 99, all the way pretty much even until now, reality TV has been the dominant presence of regular television. Yeah, and even of certainly cable with the like Real Housewives and the Jersey Shores and stuff going back 10 years or so. Like this sort of taps into to all those dopey reality shows that had yet to come out. Again, this is a very forward-thinking movie, completely unintentionally so. So that's kind of interesting. However, it's not particularly a good movie. The humor lands, but the characters are so like underwhelming or uninteresting or like you're captivated by Jason Lee because of Jason Lee, but the character of Brody is just kind of not a great character, though he's the absolute representation of every white male on the internet today, which is sad. But like there's nobody that's really likable outside of, weirdly enough, like the Jay and Silent Bob and the Shannon Doherty character I kind of liked. The women characters as well, Trish the Dish and Gwen, and then the Claire Forlani's character, whose name escapes me, Brenda. They're all, is it Brenda? Brandy Spenning. We got there in the end. Brenda was Shannon Doherty's character on 90210. Realize that now. Anyway, this movie mostly doesn't work, but it found its audience because it has this young cast, it has a great flow to it, it touched on something that would become prevalent and relevant later on, and I think the other big element for its late success is the fact that it is a studio film. Kevin Smith's Clerks is a gateway into a timeline, and I think like a snapshot in time, like I've said, but I think it's in a lot of ways, as I said before, Smith's best movie. But it is uninviting if you're not willing to go with that movie. If you don't want to listen to things, if you like, that movie doesn't move the same way this one does. The benefit this movie had was the studio behind it, like teaching Smith how to make a studio movie, and it's interesting because this will happen really two other times. I'm not going to count Cop Out, but this happens again with Jersey Girl and Zack and Mary Make a Porno, where they have a very specific style, like that has a flow to them, a movement to them, and also a lack of originality to them. That isn't to slight either of those other two movies. In fact, I quite like them, certainly better than this one. I will touch on those in the coming weeks, but it is the most accessible and inviting of all of Smith's films because of the studio presence. But likewise, it's also weirdly, as much as it feels like a Kevin Smith film because he is trying to bring what worked in Clerks into this, it doesn't necessarily feel as much like a Kevin Smith film, certainly ones that you would get with his two upcoming films that he would round out the 90s with. But this is the perfect film to introduce. If you ever have a friend or somebody who wants to know who Kevin Smith is as a filmmaker, show them Clerks, show them Mallrats, you get the general idea. And if they respond well, that's when you can start showing them his other films. As much as I think it is funny, I just don't respond too terribly well to this movie. This was, I watched his films in order of release. I started with Clerks, and I quite liked it. Mallrats, when I first saw it, I grew up in Minnesota. I still currently live in Minnesota, where Mallrats was made. And I only knew of this film by reputation, which was that it was terrible. And upon first viewing of it, I'm like, it's not that bad. It's certainly not great, but it's okay. I thought it was considerably better than its reputation, and I do stand by that now to some extent. However, for a filmmaker to come out of the indie circuit and use this as his follow-up film, it is incredibly disappointing by comparison. And I think that even when I first saw it, I thought it was inferior to Clerks, but I kept watching Smith's next films because I had heard of the reputation of Chasing Amy. I will touch on that one for next week, but Clerks is, Clerks in the Mall, what is it? Mallrats is an okay movie. It's, I'm probably being generous in giving it 3 stars, but I do like the energy, I like the cast, I liked how it eventually touched on popular culture in an interesting way. Plus, it has the greatest Stan Lee cameo of them all. He gives an excellent performance. He honestly is spectacular. The producers compared him to Wolfman Jack's segment in in American Graffiti, which is laughable, but it's also kind of not, because he is so good in it, and so real and so believable, and I absolutely loved it. Plus, this scene gets referenced in Captain Marvel, again, to show like how much legs this specific film has. But yeah, Mallrats, okay movie. I'm being generous and giving it 3 out of 4 stars. I kind of like where history has taken it, but it's easily the weakest of Smith's early career. Next week I'll be coming at you with Chasing Amy, which I'm really excited to discuss. So, anyway, thank you for watching. Let me know what you thought of Mallrats. Was this your first Kevin Smith movie, as it seems to be for many? This is a good introduction to the characters of Jay and Silent Bob and the world that Smith created. Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Peace.